Welcome to Eliot Hine Network 1 on YouTube,
DCPS Career and Technical Education.
I'm your host, Anaya.
I'm your host, Aria.
I'm your host, Natalie.
And I'm your host, Annie.
Did you know Eliot Hine Network has a new podcast in the state-of-the-art studio?
Lock us in on Apple,
iHeart,
Spotify,
Pandora,
Google,
and Amazon Music.
Joining us as a guest on the show today is Miss Eboni-Rose Thompson.
Our show topic is the district elected voice for public school children.
Ms. Thompson, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Our first segment is Understanding State Board of Education Representative for Ward 7, Eboni-Rose Thompson.
In your career path, what has surprised or inspired you?
So I would say my biggest surprise, I was probably the kid my mom thought was not coming home. So I'm from D.C., and I have 3 younger sisters. I was going to go into the Foreign Service. And so I took the test. I passed this test. I started working for DCPS. And I was surprised how many things we still needed in D.C., so I stayed, which put me on a completely different career path, which is how I got here today.
When you think about things you learned in school, what's been most useful in your job?
I think the thing that is most useful is being able to solve problems. So things like being able to work on teams, like project-based learning, or when people have pushed me to think like outside of the box, or even just like to be able to find the answer to things, because you're never going to know everything. And so being able to work with people to figure it out, being able to find out what other resources are and know how to like actually take that information, digest it, and solve problems, like that's what people pay me to do.
What skills are most important for you to do your job successfully?
The skills that are most important for me to do my job successfully as president of the state board are being able to like take in information, whether it's reading things, whether it's talking to people, and then like being able to digest that and share it with other people.
We are going to take a quick break, and we will be right back.
This broadcast is being brought to you by Eliot Hine TV on Ustream
and the Digital Knowledge Network.
I'm your host, Anaya.
I'm your host, Michaela. I'm your host, Evelyn.
I'm your host, Melody.
Our show topic today is the district elected voice for public school children.
Joining us as a guest on the show is Mrs. Eboni-Rose Thompson. Our first segment was Understanding State Board of Education Representative for Ward 7, Eboni-Rose Thompson.
Our second segment is Environmental Literacy Advisory Committee.
What is the environmental literacy plan for the District of Columbia?
So the environmental literacy plan is something that is required through like the Healthy Schools Act. The goal of the plan is to make sure we're preparing not just our schools, but preparing students. So they'll be environmentally literate when they leave school. They'll know things about environmental justice. They'll understand things about the environment, climate change, and so on and so forth.
What is the overall goal for the Environmental Literacy Committee?
So the Environmental Literacy Advisory Committee has a couple goals. It's made up of people from different agencies, not just that touch education, but touch work around the environment in the district. It helps prepare teachers so they're able to actually lead lessons around the environment. It talks about what professional development they need. It also talks about like how students can engage in project-based learning so that they can have really good experiences that build on their understanding. And it also talks about sustainable practices in schools, like everything from if you have recycling in your cafeteria or in your classrooms to how we build schools and how that can make our environment better.
All right, talk to us about reducing vehicular greenhouse gas emissions by adopting stricter emission standards for vehicles.
So one of the things the city should be proud of is that OSSI has actually received grant funding to start to electrify our bus fleet. So electric buses, and when we talk about the buses that pick up students every day who are going to different parts of the city, that can go a big way to reducing greenhouse gas emissions that would have been part of vehicles who are burning gas. And now, we can do our part to contribute to making sure we have a better world.
We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
This broadcast is being brought to you by Eliot Hine TV on Ustream
and the District Knowledge Network.
I'm your host, London Jones.
I'm your host, Kosa Deskins.
I'm your host, Natalie Jensen.
I'm your host, Avery Ruby.
Our show topic today is the district elected voice for public school children.
Joining us as a guest on the show is Miss Eboni-Rose Thompson.
Our first segment was Understanding State Board of Education Representative for Ward 7, Eboni-Rose Thompson.
Our second segment was Environmental Literacy Advisory Committee.
Our third segment is National Association of State Board of Education, Public Education Positions Committee.
How is the District of Columbia State Board of Education helping to advance equity and excellence in public education?
So the state board has a couple ways we do this. Our job is really to think about what kids learn and how they should be prepared for their future. We actually have a student advisory committee. The applications are out now. And the student advisory committee is made up of students from across the district. They are high school students, but we think it's really important for student voice to be a part of equity. And so that's one way we do it. The second way we do it is actually for every piece of resolution we pass, there is always an equity statement. And so our job is to think about how it impacts everyone and how that might need to be different for different types of learning before we ever pass anything.
As young adults, how should we prepare for college, career, and civic readiness?
So my advice for how people should prepare is to try as many things as possible. Being able even to do just this, like this could be a career path, being able to adjust, being able to have opportunities to do like public speaking. You really should start to explore like what you like and figure out what the intersection is between what you like, what you're good at, and which one of those things you can get paid for. Because people spend a lot of time at work, and people tend to be better at work that they're good at.
Do you have any final thoughts for the students at Eliot Hine?
My only final thoughts would be thank you all for doing this today. I don't know if you all know how impressive this is. I think the first time I got to know the Eliot Hine Network was actually when I used to work. I used to work for America's Promise. And so there were students who came and interviewed, I guess, my boss at the time, Colin Powell. He was like the first Black Joint Chiefs of Staff. And I'm sure you interview people like cooler than me, like him. And so just my gratitude and how impressed I am by what you all do every day.
Ms. Thompson, thank you for being a guest on our show.
Thank you all for having me.
This broadcast is being brought to you by Eliot Hine Network 1 on YouTube.
DCPS Career and Technical Education.
I'm your host, David Ruby.
I'm your host, London.
I'm your host, Koso Deskins.
I'm your host, Natalie Jensen.
Have a great day.